the truth about man.
And as a Catholic, I agree completely with that. And also as an evolutionary biologist, I accept evolution as the scientific explanation for life's diversity.
Thank you. Thank you. You're dismissed. Mary Lynn, captain of the opposing team, will submit to questioning from the affirmative team. Mr. Berlinski, would you like to start?
First question. Mr. Lynn, in the New York Review of Books this year, the famous Harvard biologist Richard Lewontin, who has a very low opinion of much of what passes as evolutionary science, the work of Richard Dawkins, for instance, explained why he nonetheless believed in essentially that kind of scientific explanation. And he said it's because we, meaning scientists like himself, have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. It is not that the methods and institutions of science compel us to accept a material explanation, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create a set of concepts that produce material explanations. And he said that commitment to materialism must be absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. That's a direct quote from Lewontin. What I want to ask you is that if he were to teach that in the public schools as a doctrine, that is the truth of materialism as equivalent to rationality, would that be an establishment of religion in violation of the Constitution?
No, it just would be bad teaching because it's an illogical assumption. The truth is that one can be a theistic believer in evolution, as I am, and have absolutely no embarrassment about either side of that equation. I think the doctor should have probably given me a call, and I would have explained that you do not have to accept this materialism in order to be a believer, that evolution's the best and only credible description of this magnificent thing we call evolution of life.
By evolution, do you have in mind a system which employs only material causes without any guidance from a pre-existing intelligence to produce all of these living things up to and including human beings?
No, I certainly find it thrilling that my concept of God actually permits a God who could choose to start a process called evolution and develop in the process an incredible number of species, all of which fit in to a unique ecological niche. I find that one of the thrills of my theology. It's
now,
nothing
you're speaking of God-guided evolution, then.
Of course I am, because most Americans, as we noted earlier, do in fact find no difference with that, because unlike the members of your panel, they understand that there are some questions that are theological, some are scientific, and that scientific questions don't involve, does God exist? That's not what your scientists should do.
Will you then support my effort that I've invited Eugenie Scott into already to get the National Academy of Sciences to explain clearly whether God-guided evolution is in fact permissible in the scientific area?
No, because science does not speak to that question at all. What you want science to do is to be able to speak...
They say it's unguided.
No, excuse me, I think they took that word out, didn't they?
The National Association of Biology Teachers took it out because it was too explicit. They imply the same thing pervasively throughout the statement, and so do all the other
I don't have any problem with them taking it out because it does have the implication that you suggested. I just think that what you want to do is make it impossible for someone to say with honesty and integrity that one believes in a divine creative process, a foot in the door, maybe more, all the way up to the knee in the door, and still believe that nothing, literally nothing that you have said or any of you have written, in fact, degrades the basic idea of evolution.
David Berlinski.
My interest in divine creation is negligible, but I do have a scientific question to ask you. In fact, two scientific questions, the second logical. Everyone familiar with the paleontological literature, every significant paleontologist says that there are gaps in the fossil record. Do you have a particular reason for demurring?
No, but there are gaps in the fossil record, of course, because the fossil record's only been examined for about 130 years. I didn't ask whether there was an explanation
for the gaps. I asked whether you agree that the fossil record is full of gaps.
Of course it has gaps.
Okay, so to that extent, the evidence does not support Darwin's theory of evolution.
No, that is absolutely wrong.
It follows as the night the day.
Of course not. How could you have a cell, for example, ladies and gentlemen, hundreds of millions of years old that would leave a fossil record. It would disintegrate. It would quite literally not be able to be found in the fossil record.
I never suggested that there may not be explanations of the gaps, but the fact that the fossil record does not on its face support Darwin's theory of evolution is a fact.
No, it does. It's just, your question was, does it prove everything yet? And the answer is, it doesn't prove anything yet. And once again, I say, how many times do we have to find those intermediate fossils? How many more steps in the progress from ancient horse to modern horse do we have to show you?
I gave you a quantitative answer, what would satisfy a scientifically respectable temperament. You spurned it. All I'm asking for is enlightenment on the significant point. Darwin's theory requires a multitude of continuous forms. We do not see that in the fossil record. In fact, major transitions are utterly incomplete. Will you accept that as an empirical fact?
Now, you sound like a guy who is writing a story about baseball, comes in the fourth inning and says, well, you know, I'm going to write about the fourth inning on. The first 3 innings didn't happen because I wasn't there to see them. The fact that we can't find every one of those intermediate fossils yet in 150...
We can't find any of the major transitions.
It's just that when we find them, Doctor, you say it's still not enough.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn. Thank you, Mr. Berlinski. Mr. Behe and Mr. Roos. The two Michaels, Professor Roos and Professor Behe. And Mr. Behe will start the questioning.
Michael, I love your writings. And in a recent article in the journal Theoretical Biology, you talked about origin of life studies. And you said, a couple of quotes, a great deal of the underpinning of discussions on the origin of life have been more philosophical than anything based in brute experience. And also, in origin of life studies, one ought to be alert for more than pure science, and that more may well be philosophical or metaphysical. And you say caveat emptor. I agree with you. Should students be taught this?
Should what?
Should high school students be told about your writings?
About my writings, or about origin of life? Well, I hope so. Goodness gracious, yes. I think that certainly there's a place for that. Whether one were going to discuss something like origin of life, say in a high school biology class, I think would be a different matter. Of course, in my country, in Canada, for instance, we have state-supported church schools, so there would be certainly no constitutional objection to that. I'm not sure that, though, that, for instance, given a lot of the things which are said about origin of life, whether it's Sagan or Lynn Margulis or that sort of thing, it would be appropriate at a high school biology level. But you know that, and I know that.
Well, now Ken has written a good book, and it really is an excellent book. But it does...
Appreciate these endorsements.
Yeah, I do like it. I do like it. I urge people to look at it.
Haven't Ms. Scott and Mr. Lynn written good books?
No, haven't. Great books, great books. But in Ken's book, he does talk about Stanley Miller's stuff, about protenoid theories. Do you think in discussion, when high school books do talk about origin of life stuff, they should consider the philosophical aspects as well?
I certainly think that they should cover it. I mean, at what level, at what depth? I think you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. If, for instance, you were going to ask high school students to, say, accept Haldane's Marxism as part of the theory, obviously not. If, on the other hand, one were going to talk about evolution and say, well, these are some of the well-known experiments, these are some of the things they've done, but look, folks, be very careful. People tend to read a lot of things into this, and I hope that a good teacher would do this. I'm quite comfortable with that. I mean, high school kids are pretty bright, you know, and pretty intelligent and pretty with it. I don't think that we should dumb down biology for them.
Good. Very good. Now, about 15 years ago, you, in a federal court of the United States, I think you said that one of the characteristics of science, scientific theory, is that it's falsifiable.
Yes, I did.
Is that correct? Can you tell me, I put up a picture of the bacterial flagellum earlier in this discussion. Can you tell me how one could falsify the assertion that it was Darwinian natural selection working on random mutation that produced that flagellum?
Well, I would have thought that for a start, you'd look at some of the molecular evidence and see, for instance, whether or not that flagellum, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, it is.
For instance, whether or not the molecular evidence is, whether it, at a molecular level, it's homologous, it looks similar to things that we want to put in the same class or the same grouping, or, for instance, does it come out more like a human or something like that? I would have thought that if, for instance, your
Flagellum, yes.
Thank you very much.
Like flagellate.
As I say, I'm a philosopher, so I'm not very good. I'm good at long